So what are your plans? What is next for Dr. Jensen?
You are checking up on me.
Your service to the Overlords is appreciated. Our complete assimilation of this dimension will now proceed.
The Shadowman is back, potentially. Black Ops 3's Apothicon antagonist might just be about to make a comeback during Black Ops 6's next map, DLC 4 Janus Towers, the epic climax, and today I wanted to start a discussion about the topic. This has been making some rounds in the community since the ending of Modern Warfare Zombies, and has only began gaining steam more and more since, and now with new information given to us from Shattered Veil, mostly specifically from Dr. PERICLES Panos, I think we might have to break this all down and see if it's really possible that the Shadowman could be being set up as a potential returning villain. And what better way, with the original characters on the precipice for returning, to potentially having the original Harbinger of Doom back alongside them. All of that and more will be explored in this video, so stay tuned until the very end. This video is a follow-up to my last video on Panos and the Shadowsmiths, which you can check out on screen and in the description if you need further context. And this is also a topic I've been discussing that spanned many videos, and their theories have changed a little each time. So if you didn't catch the videos or just need a quick refresher, before we dive into the Shadowman theory, here is all of the important information we have covered. When Black Ops 6 first launched, we focused on Panos and who he might be communicating with in Liberty Falls. Using his dialogue from the main quest and ambient lines, we built a profile for this contact. They had to meet certain criteria, having attended university, spent a long time in the Dark Ether, and visibly changed because of it, known who Richtofen is but don't hate him, had friends outside of the Dark Ether for Panos to reach, been intelligent enough to help design the SDG machine, and powerful enough to support Panos against the other Janus scientists. I won't play every single Panos quote again, but check out the prior video if you want to hear them all. But the key examples are Panos saying,
You know, part of me wants to stay. Quite. Trippy here. Okay.
Killing shouldn't be this easy.
Very
Not that I'm complaining.
different experiences at university. No, don't hate him. I don't think you do either. But if everything you told me is true,
which link this person to Richtofen in a way that implies a mutual history and set up the requirement that the contact had to have spent time at university. Our leading candidate with the launch of the game at first was Samantha MAXIS. She fit perfectly. Having studied at Heidelberg University, trapped in the Dark Ether since Black Ops Cold War, likely having changed and mutated drastically since, potentially one of the most powerful entities in the realm now, had a tricky history with Richtofen that wasn't exactly pure hatred, and had friends on the outside like Weaver and the Terminus crew. She's got the smarts for building the SDG and the power to bring Panos back and keep him protected. We also considered other possibilities. Even if at the time it felt less likely, I drew the parallel between Ultimis Richtofen with his own university background, having studied at Heidelberg University, mirroring Samantha Maxis's Dark Ether arc, and his own Dark Ether technology experience, literally having been in control of the Ether at one point in time. The other possibility I threw out at the time was even the Sam AI herself, this replica of Samantha created by Richtofen, who I figured could have been manipulating Panos to grab the Sentinel artifact and help her get a body with prima materia. But then Shattered Veil dropped new intel that changed everything. Panos' latest dialogue from the Shadow Benefactor transcript gave us this.
He came to me again, my friend, my benefactor, my salvation. Time is strange in this place. A moment ago I was in the church. A moment ago he was here with me. In another moment, who knows? Like the director, he came with promises, power, forbidden knowledge, a reckoning for my enemies. But unlike the director, his mastery of the Dark Ether is real. And what's more, he promised me a way out. When I return to the world, I will be his agent. The future he speaks of, the one we will fashion together. I can hardly wait. In only a moment, we begin.
The big reveal, of course, is that Panos reveals to this contact as he. The male pronouns being used rule out Samantha and the Sam AI. We also learn this contact has genuine control over the Dark Ether and offers Panos an escape, setting him apart from the director's hollow promises in the eyes of Panos, and showing us this person has a power over the Dark Ether that is equal, if not greater, than Sam/Zykov. Blanchard's intel adds even more context to Panos and his contact's powers.
This is John Blanchard reporting my preliminary sweep of Liberty Falls since the loss of our strike team. It doesn't look like planet Earth out here. Something is taking over. The air is heavy, almost corrosive. It hangs on everything. I feel like I'm choking just standing in it. I can barely think. Liberty Falls is gone. It's a boiling pot of chaos. We have to stop it from spilling over. Fucking Panos. What the hell did he do to my team? And who the fuck was he talking to? It's like he's possessed. He's part of the chaos now. Which means I have to stop him from spreading too. Motion-activated camera showed him arriving at Janus Towers right before it shorted out. Once I'm done here, I'll chase him down and put a bullet right in his crown.
Panos is tied to whatever's consuming Liberty Falls, and someone's guiding him. This guiding force seems to have enough control over the Dark Ether and its inhabitants that it can protect Panos, making them see him as part of the invasion instead. The male requirement and this new information left us with two main possibilities. First, Richtofen back as a contender with his university education, a large Dark Ether knowledge from projects like the Dark Ether mechanism in Blood of the Dead, and his time spent with the Shadowman. And that university line would also make sense since he went to Heidelberg himself. At least both Richtofens we knew, Ultimis and PRYING. And the SDG device looks eerily similar to the Dark mechanism, seemingly being very similar technology to extract essence and ethereal energy to allow people a way out, with the orb above both machines looking practically the same. The question is, if this is a version of a Richtofen different from that of Janus Richtofen, would he still have friends on the outside? That one is a bit harder to square the circle with. This could potentially be the COD 2025 crew, Black Ops 7, whatever it's called, though that's uncertain, but it would make sense to somehow play into the ending of this game, considering we know that a new Richtofen and a new group of the original characters alongside him will be playable in 2025 Zombies, described as being older than PRYING, but younger than Ultimis, a different version of Richtofen than his Janus self. Secondly, we have the other contender, the Shadowsmith's likely leader, the shadowy, hat-wearing figure from the Modern Warfare Zombies ending. The Shadow Benefactor title fits, and his mastery of the Dark Ether is real, suits a Dark Ether native, or powerful ancient Dark Ether entity like a Shadowsmith would be. The catch here though, the university reference seems to disqualify an ancient Dark Ether being from this role, unless they have universities in there as well, but that's just a funny sight to imagine. Alternatively, the other unless is of course he was once a human and rose to power. We learned some of the Shadowsmith's origins from the Modern Warfare Zombies Ascension mission, where the entity calls them stronger than itself.
Do not forsake our protection, sister. There are other beings here, powerful, ancient. They see you, they sense your power, they desire it.
I never wanted any of this. Why can't you just leave me alone?
All we have ever done is keep you safe. We are family.
And all my safety will cost is our world. No sale.
Hinting they are ancient and extremely powerful. This lines up perfectly with what Spragmos in Cold War described as the Old Ones on the ancient parchment paper of the Chrysalax. Very ancient and powerful creatures who predated the Dark Ether's many wars and were prophesied to return. It says the devoured shall be reborn, the scattered ashes shall be reformed, the Forsaken's torment will be undone, when the old ones reign once more. It's here we hit a fork in the road. Either the Shadowsmiths recruit humans, like we discussed when we theorized Samantha might be becoming one in the Dark Ether, before melting into prima materia, and therefore Panos' contact is a newer, once human member, or this is an ancient being who was human long ago from the Dark Ether multiverse. But how? Siraxis' Vanguard intel gave us our first clue.
I don't know how many of your centuries ago it happened, but I remember when we first became aware of your world. Before that, we thought the Dark Ether was, well, everything. Then one day, strange items began to appear in my realm. I speak of things like that pack-a-punch device, and the box that spits out guns. They caused quite an uproar among my kind. How did they work? Where do they come from? And what kind of trouble could I stir up over there? I spent several of your lifetimes just catching glimpses through the dimensional veil. I watched you silly things discover agriculture and start to trade routes all the bases. So the mechanisms that landed in the Dark Ether must have come from your future. Don't ask me how. Oh, I was too busy playing with your ancestors to care. At first, I got them to see me in campfires, then in pools of water. Later, it was mirrors and then crystal balls. The more civilized you became, the more refined the lens through which we spoke. But there was no crossing over, no visiting in the flesh, so I looked for a way to deepen my contact and my control. I needed an anchor in your reality. A trans-dimensional link so we could really connect. And that's when it hit me. That's when I had the idea for what you now call the artifacts.
When Siraxis and her generation of the Dark Ether demons, Cortifex, Invicta, etc., discovered humanity because of the events of Tagdatoten throwing the multiverse into the Dark Ether, what they found were essentially cave people. They didn't know of universes outside of their own before this. But we know that the Apothicans obviously did. They only saw these very early tribes of humanity beginning to learn agriculture post-Tagdatoten and the collapse of the multiverse. And since that would be ancient history of the current universe, that means that even Cortifex, plus the like, are much older than the current timeline's humanity. However, taking another closer look at how Zykov / the Forsaken describes the Old Ones in the early Black Ops Cold War intel, we get an interesting factual combo here. As I've said before, Zykov is only lying in this intel by saying that he is not the Forsaken. He's simply describing true events from the third person to gain our trust and convince us the Forsaken is a separate entity. But what's important here is what he says about them. These Old Ones have fought to a stalemate since the realm was young. This means that these Old Ones were likely the first ones beginning to battle when the Dark Ether was created or born. Firstly, we know that Cortifex, at a young age, took over his kingdom and began his rule by killing his parents and taking their throne. This was the spark that lit the Nether Wars, where he would take over the Dark Ether. This means, though, that Cortifex or anyone around his age couldn't be these Old Ones. For there to have been a kingdom for him to take it all means that wars were already being fought and societies existed in the Dark Ether even when he was born, which isn't close enough to when the realm was young. We know that the Dark Ether has existed as long as the Ether, back to what we essentially consider pre-Ether story era of multiversal history. It existed long ago enough to even corrupt the initial keepers into the Apothicans, and corrupt the Shadowman, before the Ether story had ever been looped the first time in its many infinite cycles. Taking all of this in combination with the fact that to have spent time in university, the person must have probably been human, this sets up an interesting conclusion to draw. The person who became this Shadowsmith not only has to be from the Ether multiverse, but likely from its beginnings, to be old enough to have been there since the realm was young. So we are talking about someone from incredibly early in the Ether story. Intelligent and educated enough to have at least spent time at a university. Someone who's willing to manipulate people, ask for rituals that seem almost satanic, but aren't quite that, and with with incredible knowledge and power over the dark ether. We also know this entity is a fan of people performing dark and nearly, but not quite, satanic rituals in their name. Tammy Lundberg describes it in her discovery of the Serpent Mound underneath the mansion.
Tammy Lundberg, PhD thesis research log recording 84, July 16th, 1980. Oh, I've barely seen my bed. Even the sun is a rare sight these days. Since uncovering the subterranean caves underneath the estate, it's been non-stop. I now know those caverns are why Shem pushed the natives off this land. They were communing with something down there. He believed, and I concur, that this is a place of power. Where that power comes from, I can't yet say. My instruments react to the energy down there, but they tell me nothing definitive. I've also uncovered that Shem was a very charismatic zealot, promising his followers immortality. Said every snake oil salesman since the dawn of time. I'm quite certain those caverns hadn't been disturbed since the 1800s. There was no vandalism, no evidence of vagrancy, not a trace of the modern world. There is clear evidence of ritualistic ceremonies, not satanic, something else. I can't deny I do feel something tugging at me when I'm down there. Well, it's important to note at this point that sleep deprivation could be affecting my senses. Observations of that sort are irrelevant for the purpose of my thesis.
This to me builds a quite obvious candidate. No, surely. The Shadowman, the leader of the Apothecans, the tempting voice of the Dark Ether in Black Ops 3 and 4, the Warden's personal satanic contact, and former questionable friend of Dr. Monty himself. He's obviously old and powerful enough, and considering how highly educated both he and Dr. Monty are, they would surely have spent time at university. The Serpent Mound and these ether worms seemingly being attracted to dark ether weak spots to harvest the essence and residual energy is interesting as well, because in the Apothecans Legion we also had the Gateworms, containing the souls of the characters. And this Serpent Mound is the very place where time fractured once more, and where these liminal spaces are cropping up, containing these souls in pockets, allowing people to live past death. This could be similar to these Gateworms. And another seemingly really obvious parallel with the Shadowman is the rituals we complete in each of the liminal rooms on Shattered Veil to feed the Sentinel Artifacts Prima Materia seem to be the exact same process as doing the rituals on Shadows of Evil to put each of the characters into the Sentinel Artifacts. Literally exactly the same. And they create Gateworms. And the giant ether worms have been harvesting on this site due to the Shattered Veil, I assume, creating a bunch of ethereal energy for it to harvest. And of course, at the end of the Shadows of Evil Easter egg, there's even a giant dark ether gateworm. This worm have even been coming here to worship the Shadowsmiths and or Shadowman. And of course, we learn of the augment worms in Vanguard zombies, which are similar to the gateworms, again feeding on this ethereal energy and discharge at the weakened veils.
Crafter Special Forces. I am concerned that the encroachment of dark ether elements into our world appears to be accelerating. The most obvious example is Zabala, the Deceiver, the assassin Cortifex recently summoned. But there are others. For example, the augmenter worms that strengthen Cortifex by corrupting our world. Thank goodness their control runes give away their position. Then there is the void spell with its energy anchors. Such powerful forms of rune magic were not possible when von List first joined with Cortifex. Simply put, our enemies are growing stronger. You can see it in the landscape all around you. Dark ether crystals are spreading throughout the land. We may be making progress in our mission, but so are they. We must redouble our efforts if we are to stop Devarheit before it is too late.
And it makes sense that we have this giant worm here on Shattered Veil, considering it's shattered here. Space-time shattered due to Shem's device. And in fact, if you believe the impossible Easter egg solution that I posed not long ago, found on the leaked Black Ops 3 development docs, it would again line up perfectly here with this being Edward Kelly. But that's a giant topic that I will save for a future video, and isn't even necessarily true for this to even work with this theory. Though if you are interested in the impossible Easter egg video, I would highly recommend checking it out after you are done with this one. Again, linked on screen and in the description, one of my best videos I've ever made. Now, I've looked into the real world stories of John Dee, who could potentially be who became Monty, and Edward Kelly, who could potentially have become the Shadowman. We know that John Dee studied for some time in a university in Belgium, and he also studied at St. John's College in Cambridge, interestingly enough, matching his name, and he declined a mathematics position at Oxford. And with Edward Kelly, whilst there's no confirmation, it is again believed that he studied at Oxford under the name of Talbot. But it could be that either or did attend university before ascending/descending to the ranks of Monty or the Shadowman, which could make this line up. But of course the Shadowman was in the summoning key when it was broken at the end of Tag the Totem, but we know the Apothegons and Keepers, before being sent into the Dark Ether, seemingly reformed as the original first race before being plunged into the Dark Ether. So it could be that somehow something similar happened with the Shadowman, where it allowed him to escape from the key, merging back with his former race. Or something happened on screen that we weren't privy to. Anyways, even if you don't think the Shadowman was Edward Kelly, it's still quite obvious from their unique human-like appearance in each of their respective species and their dialogue that both Dr. Monty and the Shadowman were probably former humans and friends. This entity even promises Panos salvation that he has to burn for, which is exactly what the Shadowman would do.
Do you not see the power Dr. Monty holds over you? Do you not see you're being deceived? I can help you! Only through me can you find salvation!
He did it with the Warden too, pretending he was the literal devil himself and he would reach the Overlords at the gates of hell, as he was a Satan worshipper. These revelations are huge because back when we first saw this entity in Modern Warfare Zombies, I felt as though the possibility he was the Shadowman was unlikely at best. Mainly because I felt we were baited already, and in that game with the red herring of the entity's silhouette looking very similar to Samantha's. So I felt this could have been a similar red herring. Treyarch are trying to make us think it's the Shadowman, only for it to be something else. However, now he seems to be the prime suspect in my opinion. It's interesting because we also had him teased long ago that he would one day meet up with the Eddie soul that he saw inside the summoning key. The exact same Eddie who is now an adult and nearing a confrontation with Panos and his mysterious ally in Janus Towers. Now this could have just been a reference to the Shadowman breaking out in Revelations, and that's what he was referring to, but the children remain in the house the whole time on Revelations. I don't think the Shadowman ever actually sees them directly, so I'm not sure what that's about, but it could just be referring to seeing Richtofen again in general, which he would when he broke out of the summoning key on Revelations. Now back during Shadows of Evil, when Richtofen first obtained the summoning key, the first thing he did with it was secure an innocent version of his own soul from Dimension 2210, killing his child self, before he could grow up to the monster he would seemingly become. And when Richtofen releases that soul, Eddie, into the house, the Shadowman tells him, "I'll be seeing you." This is interesting too, because with the Liberty Falls ending, we see Panos stealing the characters' souls, their essence, dooming them and then quickly running out of the portal to get on with more pressing matters, which is exactly what Ultimis Richtofen does to the Shadows of Evil crew. He dooms them to the apocalypse, as the world is swallowed, after he steals the summoning key, running off to have a universe to save, and he doesn't have time to explain. This could again suggest a connection with Panos and Richtofen. This is one of the biggest loose-hanging threads of the Ether story, as the Shadowman and the young Eddie have very little actual interaction in the actual storyline. Like I said before, you may think this simply exists to tease the Shadowman later escaping in the summoning key into the house in Revelations, and whatever moment he was meant to have with Eddie simply got cut. But remember, this information comes from the timeline exclusively. We never hear of this in the game, and the timeline was released with Chronicles after Revelations was already out. Sitting this new information in the timeline afterwards made it felt like a major tease for something in Black Ops 4, as most of the oddities in the timeline ended up being. But unfortunately, the Shadowman was largely missing from Black Ops 4 Zombies, apart from the background story on Blood of the Dead. We thought it was heading to an epic Monty and Shadowman boss fight at the end, but whether it was due to budget reasons or whatever the case, we never ended up seeing that. And this has simply been left hanging ever since. Could it be that we are finally about to see the results of this? Has the Shadowman simply been in hiding in the Dark Ether this entire time, amalgamating power and growing in strength, waiting for his chance to meet Eddie once again? If you've looked at all of the Dark Ether entities we've been seeing in the new story, many of them resemble resemble the Apothicons/Keepers as well, such as the Abominations being very similar to the Magwas, the Plague Hounds look very similar to the Nova Crawlers/the Keepers, or the Furies we saw in Revelations, and that could be because we're seeing remnants of the Apothicons/Keepers re-merged and then sent into the Dark Ether. But surely, if that is true, they would have to have a leader. What happened of their leaders, Monty and the Shadowman? We literally have no idea. Nikolai says in Tag the Toten's ending, Monty got thrown into the Dark Ether.
When we are gone, so too is everything that spewed forth from the ether. Element 115, the Apothicons, even Monty himself. All of it will be banished to where it belongs. The Dark Ether.
Did Monty and the Shadowman both get in there? If so, how did the Shadowman escape? Or did they merge as one entity before being thrown in there, if our speculation about the worm quote is true? There's so many different possibilities. We also know that the Richtofens from the Ether story, likely Ultimis but never 100% confirmed, was the apprentice of the Shadowman and made him some sort of promise long ago.
Long ago, I made a promise, a vow, to protect him. In order to keep my word, I have done bad things, all for a purpose you could never understand.
As the Shadowman explains on Revelations,
You do know that Richtofen is a friend of mine. I say friend, but really he's so much more than that. At one point, I almost considered him my apprentice. I mean, he did stab my reporter friend and steal the summoning key. But at one point, he did everything I told him to. I keep hoping he'll remember the promise he made to me so long ago.
Another word for benefactor could even be apprentice. I think this is likely referring to when Richtofen touched the MPD for the first time and became corrupted by the many voices within the Dark Ether, one being of the Shadowman. And maybe some of the events to gain power throughout Black Ops 2 Zombies could have been motivated by the Shadowman speaking to him, but along the lines he ended up just loving the fun of being all powerful and the chaos of it all, as opposed to just doing it for evil purposes. So could Richtofen be trying to make good on that promise now? Is the reason we never saw the results of this in the Ether story simply due to the fact the promise was for what to do if he had lost the eternal cyclical battle, a way to bring him back. It being the Shadowman brings up another point, which is Monty's line. He says the Shadowman was his friend before he was recruited by the Apothicons. Then he acted as their agent, zipping around the galaxy.
Now here's the thing. I knew a bloke, and I'm talking way, way, way back. He was the sweetest, most charming individual you could ever wish to meet. He was funny too. We used to have such a good old laugh together. Honestly, my sides hurt thinking about it. He was my friend. He was my best friend. And then the Apothicons got hold of him. Since then, he's pretty much acted as their agent, zipping around the galaxy. Wait, I keep changing it, don't I? Which do you prefer? Universe? Multiverse? Omni-fucking-verse? Oh, it doesn't really fucking matter, does it? Yeah, let's get on with it. Short version is, he's no longer sweet, charming, or funny. He's what brought them here, when he escaped the key.
And Panos says, when I return to the world, I will be his agent, which seems to be an intentional parallel to Monty's line.
When I return to the world, I will be his agent.
Now, like I said, it's unlikely that Ultimis Richtofen is the contact speaking to Panos, in my opinion. It could be a different, new version of Richtofen in 2025 Zombies, but jumping into this theory, it's made me think, what if it could actually be Ultimis Richtofen? Yes, we saw him get shot in the head by Nikolai, but there's a lot of connections here with Richtofen, and it has me wondering again about his line about not having a rabbit in his hat, not having a last-minute moment of betrayal in the ending of Tag the Totem.
If I'm honest, I'd been expecting one since we all got together. Sadly, no. I am all out of rabbits.
It seems odd for Richtofen. He was so calculated. He basically unlocked the entirety of the timeline when he gained access to being in control of the ether without having to read the chronorium. He knew probably for a long time it was always heading to this, which is why he was so quiet in the ending. So unlike Richtofen, maybe he did have a plan, a rabbit in his hat that we don't know, and it's got something to do with how he returns, or maybe even something to do with the promise he made to the Shadowman. And potentially he might have even allowed the events of the new universe to be created to lead to something to do with his and the Shadowman's return that then doesn't factor into Monty. Maybe this could have been a way to defeat Monty because he got thrown into the dark ether, but allows the Shadowman to return and him. Or maybe just him, I don't know. This is still a mystery to me, of course, and with Mr. Peaks now being the helper in the dark ether instead of Samantha's teddy bear, it again has another interesting parallel to this line that we've been talking about for a long time, especially with the emote pulling the rabbit out of the hat and the burnt note from probably the soul of Richtofen's son, Samuel, describing Mr. Peaks as keeping him safe in the dark place and living in his hat. It's all very interesting, and it would make sense if there's some sort of connection here with Ultimis Richtofen, maybe even if his soul is within the rabbit, if he does bond with the soul of Samuel, the red orb in the first Outbreak quest. If there is a connection there, it would make sense. Now, we don't know if the red orb is the soul of Samuel, but it would seem possible. We've learned that Richtofen tried cloning his son, but it didn't work, it didn't come out right, and he ended up mutating and corrupting, probably into some sort of zombie or dark ether entity, and he had to be mercy killed, he had to be euthanized, he was suffering too much. And I wonder if that could have then created the soul, the red orb we see in the second Outbreak quest, as this is some sort of prima materia, because it looks very similar to prima materia, and this could have been holding the soul of that deceased, mutated, cloned version of Samuel. I'm not exactly sure, but anyways, another interesting point with Richtofen touching the MPD is that he hears many voices of corruption that speak to him from within the dark ether, not just the Shadowman. We never hear of the other entities he speaks to, whether they were just other Republican entities or other unrelated species entirely, but maybe it could even be the Shadowsmiths if they're not one and the same as the Shadowman, or the Shadowman was just one Shadowsmith. Maybe there's many Shadowsmiths, and could he have even seen an evil in the dark ether such as them? But if it does have some sort of connection to Ultimis Richtofen and his hat quote, it would make him seem like a genius, tying everything back together as if he had this all planned all along. Now, the Shadowman is kind of an obvious thing to point out, as this is basically the first thing people said when they saw the Shadowsmiths for the first time, but it's worth reminding ourselves too of the appearance of this entity of the ending in Modern Warfare Zombies. He appears as a cloud of black smoke floating towards the mirror, wearing a large and dark hat of some kind. While it looks to be more of a cowboy hat, just judging by the shape, perhaps that initial assessment isn't right. This could simply be a slightly different hat for a modern Shadowman redesign, maybe even more powerful by all of this time in the dark ether. Both are floating as well, with smoke around their feet. The Shadowman's was purple, now it just seems to be black, but we're not sure if that's just because of the lighting. So let's not gloss over this fact. If this is actually the Shadowman, he could have been growing in power in the dark ether since the time he first entered, during what would likely be the first cycle of the ether story. Then you could add in the dark ether's time dilation, how many times that story likely looped, which is an incomprehensible number. And then also the entire time of the new universe's existence. This is an incredibly and unfathomable long period of time, and likely means his mastery of the dark ether is unparalleled. There would be nothing and no one as strong as something like that. Let's take a look at another very interesting passage from Panos with quotes on his ally. We have a document of his personal diary dated 2/5/1991. I am no stranger to hard work, so I am used to being tired. Exhausted even. I know this all too well, but this is different. This morning I felt like I didn't quite wake up from my dreams. Indistinct voices continued to echo in my mind. Nothing of them were familiar to me, but one stood out. He spoke with an almost hypnotic but confident tone, and addressed me by name. I could teach you so much, Pericles, but you are going to have to want it. You are going to have to burn for it with all your soul. And even now, as I drink my coffee and write this, I feel a cold chill in my veins. Now this to me sounds so similar to the Shadowman's MO, and is so similar to what happens when, for example, the Shadowman tempts Ludwig Maxis to pick up the summoning key in the Revelations intro.
Please, you must help me.
He heard voices, you see, calling to him.
Only together can we prevent the destruction of your world.
It wasn't really his fault. You know, he hasn't actually got his soul yet. All I got was a brain. Anyway, the key thing, as in the thing that is key, is that Maxis fiddled around with the summoning thingamajig and accidentally released an even bigger bastard.
At first, the whispers to Maxis are indistinct, but as it grows, the Shadowman gets clearer and clearer, more confident. In this personal diary entry from Panos, it gives us so much extra context on their conversations, and we get a sentence from the contact written down verbatim. "I could teach you so much, Pericles, but you are going to have to want it. You are going to have to burn for it with all your body and soul."
I'll lead the way. I will show you the path. Only through me, the Shadowman, will you find your redemption.
As he said, this sounds so much like how the Shadowman spoke to the characters in the classic Ether story, that it's almost shocking.
I have been watching. I have seen each and every one of your misdeeds. I know who you are. But questions remain. Why do you do the things you do? Do you not see the futility of your tiny, insignificant existence? You are but fragments of a bigger universe. Your sins serve only as an invitation to an evil beyond your imagination.
The use of calling him by his first name so casually of characters usually not referred to by that name even puts me in mind of him calling the Warden by his first name, Archibald.
That's a good lad. You have been an adequate servant, Archibald. Therefore you will continue to serve after the corruption.
Such an honor for me.
But even if this character is not the Shadowman exactly, I feel as though the connections are too blatant to simply disregard. If this character isn't the Shadowman and is someone else entirely, I think the only other solution is to suggest that the Shadowman was a Shadowsmith. This echoes back to our earlier discussions on them potentially being able to recruit to their ranks. Perhaps it is then that the Shadowsmiths once fought to rule the Dark Ether back during the early periods and recruited this specific Shadowsmith we see in the mirror as one of their ranks, and he was simply the one assigned to trying to break into the outside world for them whilst they waged war inside. This would line up with his dialogue in Shadows of Evil about the Overlords.
Your service to the Overlords is appreciated. Our complete assimilation of this dimension will now proceed.
So even if this specific character is someone new, they not only know the Shadowman and the classic Ether story's plot, but also be far more powerful than him, as they are one of the entities he referred to as his overlords. These could have even been higher ranking, above the Apothicons, but commanding them. This would also explain the parasitic species that the first Archon supposedly eliminated from the Dark Ether. And we see on the Terra Maledicta loading screen, there is one faction that is blacked out, and they do have what looks to be tendrils and tentacles coming from them. Now, before I speculated that they could be the Disciples, but now we know the Disciples are actually seemingly the Order, having been encapsulated into the Dark Ether and mutating into them. That seems unlikely. And instead, this could have been the remnants of the Apothicons still serving the Shadowsmiths after the Shadowman himself had died/refused with Monty in Tag de Toten. This does bring up a small tangent though. This character could be Dr. Monty and the Shadowman after forcibly being reformed in Tag de Toten. Like, before they split, they were originally a Shadowsmith, and then they were responsible for creating the prior multiverse, but then split along an ideological line about what to do with this new world, which is why they split apart and ended up ruling opposing factions. While suggesting a single Shadowsmith could have held the power to create the entire Ether multiverse might sound insane at first, let's take a look back at what we had leaked to us prior about the plot of COD 2025 Zombies months ago now. They were described as some new entity that Tom Henderson teased as being called a Warden, and they would be attempting to obtain the essence of the original characters and use it to restore the Ether multiverse. If this hat-wearing Shadowsmith is the Warden of the Dark Ether, or even if the Warden just is the Shadowsmith themselves and not even the one we saw, then we would know outright they have the power to do so, or he would simply be no threat to us. And surely if the villain of COD 2025 is trying to restore the multiverse, they must have some sort of connection to said old multiverse to even know of it and want it to return. Surely then it should have something to do with Monty/the Shadowman / the Keeper / the Apothecans. So I think that pretty much puts the nail in the coffin in this one for me. After reviewing the available information, this character may very well be, or at least related to, the Shadowman in some capacity. As much as I am shocked to say that because I was a disbeliever before. While I thought it was crazy at first during Modern Warfare Zombies, maybe I was just feeling tainted by seemingly feeling burnt about many red herrings that Trek have given us before. But as more and more information seems to keep pointing at the idea that the Shadowman is potentially really about to make a comeback, I have grown to like this idea. And if it isn't him directly, Trek are 100% intending us to think that it is and have this discussion. Whilst it could also mean the idea that he simply was a Shadowsmith, and the one we are fighting soon will be their leader and an even more powerful entity than the Shadowman, this would allow the villain we fight next to basically be unparalleled in power across Zombies' history, and also provide some really meaningful and interesting ties to the classic Ether story that aren't just nostalgia. A way to give us more context on what was really happening in that story, in the early cycles. What was going on in the Dark Ether at that time, and how the original characters are now going to fit into this greater Dark Ether universe, and why they are coming back. But what if it could be Richtofen or someone else working for them? So we go through essentially 3 people. Could the Shadowman and or the Shadowsmiths be using Richtofen for their ends, for example, promising him a life outside of the Dark Ether if he just exists as a memory in a liminal space? And they have this evil Richtofen getting Panos to do their dirty work, but then at the end, they get what they want. Betray him, like the Shadowman did to the Warden on Alcatraz. This could be very similar to Primus Richtofen's arc of This Me.
I wanted to keep going. This me. My senses are...
That made him perpetuate the cycle at the cost of the universe and deaths of many, and deaths of sufferings of many. This new Richtofen could again want to be this me. He could want a life similar to the Sam AI. This way, the contact could essentially be both a new Richtofen and the Shadowman / Smiths in some capacity. Maybe even if the contact is the Shadowsmiths and or Shadowman, they could have been speaking to Janus Richtofen through his dreams as well, promising him for a way to bring back his family with prima materia, only for him to be effed over in the end. Maybe even if Samuel's been communicating through his dreams, but some sort of distorted version of his soul. Maybe even of that clone, and then being recruited by them. Or could even get them, but at a cost to the universe. When we activate the Sentinel artifact, it could plunge us into the Dark Ether, and space-time completely breaks even more so than what Shem did. And Richtofen may get his family, but everything is ruined because of it. Or maybe even his family are not the same ones. They might be some sort of evil versions of them. We know that the Shadowman / Smiths, whoever they are interested in harnessing the original character's essence, like I've said over and over, which makes me wonder if these particular individuals might disappear. However, they reassemble copies in liminal spaces. Think of Josiah Shem, Colton, and others like them. We've been discussing essence as if it's a personification of a specific moment in time, something incredibly esoteric. This concept is literally embedded within the site of Shattered Veil itself. Shem and the others may have died in real life, but they remain alive and conscious within those liminal realms. They respond to your actions. They are not just static recordings, even though they've long been gone. That's why he's so intent on using their essence. It's similar to how we infuse the artifact with the energy of the Mansion people. Now the Shadowsmiths want to replicate that process with the entire original crew. And I just hope that with them bringing the original characters back, it doesn't feel contrived and it doesn't undo the ending of Tag the Totem, which I don't really have that much faith in that, but we will just have to wait and see. But let me know your thoughts on this. Is it the Shadowman, or is it the Shadowsmith, or are they the same? Or could it even be some sort of version of Richtofen? Did he know or work for them? It's very interesting how COD 2025 is starting to really be set up, and I'm curious how they'll wrap up this story and set this up concretely for sure, so we know who this contact is for sure, hopefully, by the time of Janus Towers. Anyways, plenty more storyline videos to come, as always. Thank you for watching the video, make sure to subscribe if you're not here for latest and greatest Call of Duty news information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye.